The Jimmy Z Show.
Okay, the next soundbite is from the Rachel Maddow show on MSNBC. We start off with a couple of soundbites. You're going to hear Wayne Lapierre from the National Rifle Association. You're going to hear Eric Holder deny that there was ever such a scheme to use Fast and Furious as a way to enact stricter gun laws. And you're going to hear the final tally of the vote and the Oversight Committee to find Eric Holder in contempt.
When he got elected, they concocted a scheme to stay away from the gun issue, lull gun owners to sleep, and play us for fools in 2012.
And more importantly, Mr. Attorney General, your oversight of an agency, of a department, of individual leaders in that department that have not been held accountable.
Well, with all due respect, and I mean this with great respect, the notion that this was an operation set up to do something to impinge upon the Second Amendment rights of my fellow citizens is absurd.
The clerk will report.
23 ayes, 17 noes.
The ayes have it, and a contempt report is reported to the House. Without objection, so ordered. The committee stands adjourned.
Party line vote in one Republican-controlled House committee today to hold Attorney General Eric Holder in contempt of Congress. The Speaker of the House, John Boehner, says a vote in the full House on that matter will be held next week.
Again, knowing what we know as Americans, forget Republicans and Democrats. Knowing what we know about what Eric Holder is doing, withholding documents that have been subpoenaed legally. Eric Holder is, by definition, in contempt. It is the Democrats that are voting on party lines. It is the Republicans who are voting on principle.
It's all about a conspiracy theory marinated on the right, essentially alone in right-wing media, that the Fast and Furious gun-running program in the Southwest was somehow a conspiracy to take away Second Amendment rights by upsetting people about gun violence. Joining us now is Bob Herbert, former columnist with the New York Times. He's now a senior distinguished fellow at the Demos Center for Public Policy and Advocacy. Bob, thank you for being here.
It's great to be here, although I have to tell you, Rachel, it is not fair to have to comment on this story in public, because once you immerse yourself in this issue, it's like being on acid.
And yet, I have an article at CBS News. It's in the show notes. You can read it yourself. Documents obtained by CBS News show that the ATF used Fast and Furious to make the case for gun regulations. Period. End of sentence. So this commentator can laugh it up and talk about being on acid, which I think most liberals are. This is highly insulting because I've got the story right here. Rachel Maddow or her staff must not know how to do research online. Now listen again as she introduces her guest, Bob Herbert, and he's giggling in the background like a little girl.
Joining us now is Bob Herbert, former columnist with the New York Times. He's now a senior distinguished fellow at the Demos Center for Public Policy and Advocacy. Bob, thank you for being here.
It's great to be here, although I have to tell you, Rachel, it is not fair to have to comment on this story in public, because once you immerse yourself in this issue, it's like being on acid.
What a schmuck. They're laughing it up, but we have the facts.
Once you immerse yourself in this issue, it's like being on acid. It is unbelievably crazy.
And let me say that is true of a lot of gun issues. Gun issues I've always described as the great ungoogleable. Like it's not actually possible to get rational, unbiased, real information about what's going on with gun laws, particularly about gun politics in this country, because when you Google it, you are so deep into conspiracy theory land that you can get no real information.
All right, that's another big fat lie. I've got some information for you. It's not that hard to find. I dug this up myself because I wanted to know. I was thinking, okay, well, we probably realize, those of us on the right, know that there are probably more instances of self-defense with guns than there are criminals killing people or harming people with guns. And that's something that I've said for many years. but I wanted these statistics, so I got them. Law-abiding citizens use guns to defend themselves against criminals as many as 2.5 million times every year, or about 6,850 times a day. This means that each year, firearms are used more than 80 times more often to protect the lives of honest citizens than to take lives. That evades Rachel Maddow. Also, at handgunsmag.com, 2011 FBI violent crime statistics. Gun ownership is up, and the crime rates drop. It was 20 or so years ago when one of the big three networks, I think it was ABC, broadcast a made-for-TV movie about what would happen if it was suddenly legal for everyone to not just buy a gun, but carry it. What did they envision happening? What do you think? The Wild West, gunfights in the street, any ridiculous liberal stereotype about redneck, inbred, psychotic gun owners you can think of. What a difference a few short decades make. Currently, just about every state but Illinois allow concealed carry of one form or another, and about 37 of those states have what I consider rational laws, some version or variation of shall issue, which is where the government has to give you a CCW unless there is a specific reason, criminal record, documenting psychiatric problems, not to. Here's the bottom line. The FBI just put out 2011 violent crime rates, and lo and behold, violent crime decreased 4% in 2011, considering how many guns are being sold in this country and how many states allow concealed carry. No one who is rational could now argue that legally owned guns or the ability to carry them has anything to do with increasing the rate of violent crime. Nothing. In fact, looking at the data, it appears that guns and concealed carry permits might be causing the crime rate to go down. What response do gun grabbers have to these statistics? None. They're probably waiting for the next random shooting, the next tragedy where they can broadcast their political agenda. The next time some anti-gunner starts ranting at you, calmly use some of the facts in the above article to shut them down. They won't listen, of course, because their position is emotion-based, but maybe someone else within earshot who is on the fence will walk away a little smarter. That's an article at handgunmag.com. And, of course, it's in my show notes. So those two articles that I found in less than 30 seconds kind of put Rachel Maddow to shame, don't they?
Let me say that is true of a lot of gun issues. Gun issues I've always described as the great ungoogleable. Like it's not actually possible to get rational, unbiased, real information about what's going on with gun laws.
Jeez. Okay, we're going to open up this hour and come right back and continue listening to more of this drivel from these two morons, Rachel Maddow and Bob Herbert, I think his name is. Okay, we're going to go back to Rachel Maddow talking with this clod about gun violence, about the Republicans and Eric Holder, finding Eric Holder in contempt, and talking about this supposed fantasy, a conspiracy theory, according to her, that the ATF was going to use Fast and Furious to enact stricter gun control laws. But they were. It was a fact. And today I have the CBS News article in my show notes. Okay, this is not rocket surgery, except for Rachel Maddow has a hard time finding facts.
Joining us now is Bob Herbert, former columnist with the New York Times. He's now a senior distinguished fellow at the Demos Center for Public Policy and Advocacy. Bob, thank you for being here.
It's great to be here, although I have to tell you, Rachel, it is not fair to have to comment on this story in public, because once you immerse yourself in this issue, it's like being on acid. It is unbelievably crazy.
Well, I guess Cheryl Atkinson, the reporter, and CBS News, the network, are unbelievably crazy because they reported this story. And then Rachel Maddow utters this completely ignorant statement.
And let me say that is true of a lot of gun issues. Gun issues I've always described as the great ungoogleable. Like it's not actually possible to get rational, unbiased, real information about what's going on with gun laws.
Yeah, it's impossible. I found a couple of great articles in less than 30 seconds, but it's impossible. You can't find good information about guns.
It's not actually possible to get rational, unbiased, real information about what's going on with gun laws, particularly about gun politics in this country, because when you Google it, you are so deep into conspiracy theory land that you can get no real information. This Fast and Furious, I think, is a subset of that. But yet, a party line, 100% of Republicans voting on it today, voting for it, voting to hold their Attorney General in contempt over this. Is this the fringe becoming mainstream, or is there something else going on?
The Republican Party has hooked up with the fringe a long time ago.
You know, we talked about this yesterday as well, the fact that liberals and Democrats keep saying that the Republican Party, the GOP, has been taken over by right-wing fringe kooks. No, that's not the case. What has happened, in fact, is that the left-wing kooks have taken over the Democratic Party. Laughing about gun laws and making up fantasies about conspiracy theories is psychotic. It's left-wing fringe kookism.
Is this the fringe becoming mainstream, or is there something else going on?
The Republican Party has hooked up with the fringe a long time ago. The Republican Party, you know, it's a mainstream party in the sense that we only have two parties, but it is not mainstream if you're thinking about the way most Americans think about most important issues.
You know, these liberal columnists, pundits, and commentators who get on TV and say absurd things like this, they are paid to lie. The specific reason that Bob Herbert is on the Rachel Maddow show is to lie, is to make stuff up and lie. That's why he's there. This thing that just came out of his mouth is ridiculous.
It is not mainstream if you're thinking about the way most Americans think about most important issues.
No, he's exactly wrong. In fact, let's go to Rasmussen. Wait a minute, if I could spell it, then Google will give it to me. Okay, this is Rasmussen Reports, the most accurate pollster in the entire country. Trust on the Issues, dated May 31st, so that's about 3 weeks ago. On the economy, most Americans, 50% to 39%, trust the Republicans over the Democrats. On health care, most Americans, 44% to 43%, trust Republicans over Democrats. On education, for some insane reason, most Republicans trust Democrats, 43 to 39% over Republicans. On energy policy, it's tied, 43%. On immigration, most Americans trust Republicans, 48% to 36%. On Social Security, I can't understand why, but most Americans trust Democrats, 42% to 40% over Republicans. On Afghanistan, most Americans trust Republicans, 42% to 37%. On government ethics, split down the middle, 37%. On national security, most Americans trust Republicans, 50% to 36%. And on taxes, most Americans trust Republicans, 46% to 38%. All right? So what did he say again?
It is not mainstream if you're thinking about the way most Americans think about most important issues.
Oh, so the GOP is not mainstream on most important issues that Americans face. I just disproved what Bob Herbert said. Ain't that beautiful?
But what's important to look at here is what are senators like, what are people like Issa and Grassley doing, riding the wave of this guy Vanderbilt, for example. Vanderbilt comes up with something that is just utter madness, and then the big shots in the Republican Party just pounce on it, and then ultimately it leads them to a contempt citation against the Attorney General of the United States. rights. I mean, that is just madness.
Okay, let me clear this up. It was not the fact that the Obama administration was going to use Fast and Furious to enact stricter gun control laws that ended up with Eric Holder being found in contempt.
Non sequitur.
That's exactly right. It's a complete and total non sequitur. The reason you can't even explain things like this to people like Bob Herbert and Rachel Maddow, but the fact is, Eric Holder is responsible for Eric Holder having been found in contempt. All right, that's it.
I mean, we need to understand, one, this was not a Holder operation, this sting, which was a terrible sting and ended, tragically and that sort of thing. But Holder ordered an end to this. The people in charge of the sting were either fired or reassigned. There is an IG investigation in the Justice Department, and Congress is investigating it. I don't have any problem with that at all. But the idea that this has something to do with the Obama administration wanting to undermine Second Amendment rights is just madness of the highest order.
Except I have the article right here. Oh, and by the way, here's a question that Rachel Maddow will not ask Bob Herbert. If all Eric Holder did was shut down Fast and Furious, why doesn't he release the documents to prove it? This is so simple to figure out. If Eric Holder did the right thing, then he would release the documents and prove it, and this investigation would have been done months ago.
For people like me, for example, who are very much in favor of enforcing gun control laws and who would like gun control laws strengthened, who would like to make it more difficult for people to access guns, Obama has been a terrible disappointment. The Brady campaign gave him an F for his performance in terms of gun control. So it is just madness to talk about him undermining the Second Amendment. He's done nothing of the sort.
Well, if only Fast and Furious had worked, then Bob Herbert and Rachel Maddow and all the rest of the gun control nuts would have been happy.
But in terms of real policy concerns and the real responsibilities of governing, I was focused today on that too, on the issue that, if you really are interested in gun policy and you're not just interested in conspiracies about this, the Brady campaign has given the Obama administration an F. They've done nothing to increase gun control at all, whether or not you think that is a good idea. But
well, if only Fast and Furious had worked, the Brady Gun Nut organization could give Obama an A instead of an F.
Is it true that a rationally based administration ends up being constrained to the point where they can do zero on a policy issue? Because even when they do zero, that's construed as some sort of act of aggression.
I don't think so. I think that, whether it was the Obama administration or if it was another Democratic administration, I believe they could have done more on gun control and a number of other issues. I think that the forces who are opposed to some of the things that the Republican Party stands for should be fighting harder against the Republican Party, should be fighting back harder on some of these issues. And if you take gun control, for example, I mean, this is like an unbelievably important issue. The Republicans talk about being concerned about this agent who was killed, and you're right to be concerned about that. But 100,000 Americans are shot every year, and more than 30,000 die, and these are a result of homicides, suicides, and gun accidents. Your viewers ought to understand that if they watch your show, during the course of this show, 3 Americans will die from gunshot wounds, because 3 Americans die from gunshot wounds every hour. So this is like an incredibly important issue.
Okay, I'm going to use the statistics from the Gun Owners of America that I read earlier toward the end of the first hour, and I'm going to take the time to use these statistics to prove that guns save lives. Bob Herbert says the following.
But 100,000 Americans are shot every year, and more than 30,000 die.
And he's including not just homicides, but also suicides and gun accidents. Even still, with 30,000 people dying during the course of a year, guns are used 2.5 million times a year in self-defense. Now, Bob Herbert continues.
Your viewers ought to understand that if they watch your show, during the course of this show, 3 Americans will die from gunshot wounds, because 3 Americans die from gunshot wounds every hour.
All right, so how many times each hour are guns used in self-defense? 285 times. 285 times. Now, if you divide 285 by 80, you get about 3.5, which matches pretty close to his statistic of 3 deaths per hour. Let me read some other statistics here that Bob Herbert and Rachel Maddow do not want you to know. Of the 2.5 million times citizens use their guns to defend themselves every year, the overwhelming majority merely brandish their gun or fire a warning shot to scare off their attackers. Less than 8% of the time, a citizen will kill or wound his or her attacker. As many as 200,000 women use a gun every year to defend themselves against sexual abuse. Even anti-gun Clinton researchers concede that guns are used 1.5 million times annually for self-defense. According to the Clinton Justice Department, there are as many as 1.5 million cases of self-defense every year. The National Institute of Justice published this figure in 1997 as part of Guns in America, a study which was authored by noted anti-gun criminologists Philip Cook and Jens Ludwig. Armed citizens kill more crooks than do the police. Citizens shoot and kill at least twice as many criminals as police do every year. 1,527 to 606. And readers of Newsweek learned that only 2% of civilian shootings involved an innocent person mistakenly identified as a criminal. The error rate for the police, however, was 11%, more than 5 times as high. I could keep reading statistics from this page for the rest of the hour. Bob Herbert is wrong. Rachel Maddow is wrong. They are spewing misinformation on purpose.
Your viewers ought to understand that if they watch your show, during the course of this show, 3 Americans will die from gunshot wounds.
You know, what would happen if a conservative was on the Rachel... What a stupid thing to say. But what if a conservative was talking with Rachel Maddow and said, do you realize that during the course of your program, 285 people over that hour are going to defend themselves with a firearm? Her head would explode. She would not be able to do the rest of her show. Now, this guy, Bob Herbert, he loves to say die.
30,000, more than 30,000 die. During the course of this show, 3 Americans will die. Die, 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 die. This is like an incredibly important issue.
Well, it is an important issue, but you're not telling the truth. You're lying.
So this is like an incredibly important issue. So if the Republicans are concerned about what happens when guns get into the wrong hands, they should pay attention to the 100,000 Americans who are affected by this.
But any discussion of how to deal with that in policy is so backwards through the telescope
also,
that doing nothing is construed as doing as secretly plotting to do too much.
Exactly. And not only that, what they really want to do is they want to undermine the legitimacy of the people who do not agree with them. So they want to undermine the legitimacy of Eric Holder, of Barack Obama, and ultimately the Democratic Party.
Well, lining up with the break their windows militia blogger guy is a really good way to assert your own credibility. Yeah. This is just an incredible story. Bob Herbert, former columnist at the New York Times, now at Demos. Bob, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rachel.
Well, we know that the left-wing media lies often, but I haven't heard that much dishonesty in one clip that was about 7 minutes in a very long time. He's throwing around that number of 100,000 as if that's a huge number. What about the 2.5 million people who defend themselves every year with a firearm? He's not going to talk about that. I need to take a deep breath here. That makes me really angry. Dishonesty and hypocrisy make me very angry. I can disagree with somebody all day long, but if they're going to be dishonest or hypocritical, I tense up and I'm ready to drill somebody. Yeah, Mr. Violence, that's me. No, seriously, if you want to disagree with me on any topic, I'm good. Just be honest and don't be a freaking hypocrite.
The Jimmy Z Show.